Good morning to you, Sir Vince.
Good morning.
It's quite interesting. There are so many of these events happening right now, and so much, very much led by people who are people who voted, not just voted Remain, but still believe that we should be remaining right now in defiance of what the British people have asked for in the referendum. What do you make of the significance of your former party leader, the man you took over from Sir Nick Clegg, joining forces across the board with Labour and Tories as well to campaign against a hard Brexit today?
Well, it doesn't surprise me. A lot of this is happening. Nick Clegg is doing what I'm doing, which is talking to people in other parties about the practical issues around Brexit. I think the reason it's happening now is because there is a new round of negotiations with the European Union in a month's time. And if that isn't resolved, we're potentially in a serious mess because there is no way of going forward on the existing timetable. What's brought this to a head, I think, is the fundamental divisions within the cabinet about the customs union issue. And although that's a somewhat kind of nerdish technical problem, it confronts two serious issues. One is, how do you have a form of Brexit that doesn't create a barrier across the island of Ireland? And the other is, how do you do this in a way that doesn't create very serious problems for a lot of our manufacturing industries like cars and aerospace, where there are widgets flying backwards and forwards across national frontiers and the danger of having constant checks and taxes, which makes their existence in Britain unviable. So that's the practical problem which has brought all this to a head now.
Now, obviously, there's a lot of people on the Remain side say, well, this wasn't discussed. We didn't know what we were voting for. It was very clear that leaving the EU meant leaving the customs union, leaving the single market. And this was an issue that was raised as a concern, particularly over the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Former Prime Ministers, indeed, flew to Northern Ireland to make this point, John Major and Tony Blair. Do you, as someone I mean, and I do admire this, at least you openly campaign that you don't think we should have Brexit. Your party stood on a manifesto for Remain. Do you think that these things are genuinely insurmountable in the 21st century?
I think these problems are very serious. I mean, I don't actually understand what the Prime Minister's proposing. I mean, ironically,
I don't think she does, to be fair.
I have a certain amount of sympathy with her critics within the cabinet because it's not clear how it would work. And indeed, the European Union is saying that also. But I think I understand the sort of at emotional level what she's trying to do. She's trying to achieve a compromise between what we call the hard Brexit, leaving all the economic institutions of the European Union, and those who want to remain. And it's understandable that people should want to compromise, but it's this problem. The best way of describing it is a divorce, and you're either divorced or you're married. You can't be half one and half the other. And so I think entirely creditable efforts to get a compromise, to get a soft Brexit, what is being exposed is that this actually isn't possible, and we are going to have to make some fairly brutal choices.
Well, you say fairly brutal choices. To a certain extent, the British people made that fairly brutal choice, didn't they? Best part of 2 years ago. And yet we've still got this battle. When it comes down to where you can't compromise any further, Brexit should win rather than the other way around. And given that even like Michael Gove, who's been a fairly loyal Brexiteer in Theresa May's cabinet as the Environment Secretary, he said there were significant question marks about whether Theresa May's proposed customs partnership with the EU could actually work, and saying it does have flaws. Boris Johnson went further and said it was crazy. But fundamentally, as you say, you can't be a little bit married. I would say you can't be a little bit pregnant. Reality is there isn't really a compromise to be made. Do you not think that Theresa May should just bite the bullet and simply go down the Brexit route? I mean, you can then oppose it, but at least we'd know where we were.
Well, I would oppose it. I think part of the problem here is that a lot of the people who voted Remain have basically taken the view which you've just set out. Well, a decision was made, let's get on with it, let's see what happens, but very much in the spirit that some kind of sensible compromise should be achieved. Now, if a compromise cannot be achieved, and we are dealing with fairly extreme options that will be very disruptive, I think the public opinion will shift, and that's why I'm continuing to make the case I am, that at the end of all this, when we know what's in store, the people should have the final say. But I think over the next 2 months, all of this is going to crystallise, and that's why you're seeing the debate you have. And the challenge now is to the Prime Minister to come up with an approach to the negotiation which can unify her own side, let alone everybody else. And she's so far not doing it.
Well, indeed. I mean, I've got as many criticisms as anyone of Theresa May's sort of failure to lead and to make decisions. But do you not think that if there wasn't this sort of Ramona cabal, both within the cabinet, within Parliament, the likes of you and many backbenchers in the Labour Party as well, actually, Sir Keir Starmer on the front bench of the Labour Party heading off to try and do his own negotiations with Michel Barnier, that actually we would be delivering Brexit much sooner. There would be indecision if there wasn't this constant snapping at the heels of questioning the actual decision that the British people had made. We could have already Brexited by now.
No, it's all. I mean, actually, it is a genuinely complicated issue, and the complications are now becoming apparent. I mean, I think this isn't just a standstill situation. We're not just constantly reliving the referendum. Things are changing.
Really, it feels like that on my Twitter feed sometimes.
Well, one of the key things that's happened is, I'm sure you saw the reports on this yesterday, that large numbers of students, young people, I think there's over 1 million, people who didn't vote in the referendum are now becoming mobilised and saying, look, this is our future, we had no say in it. And they're becoming increasingly concerned about the implications of it. So we're dealing with a moving democracy rather than one
Sir
that
Vince,
is
with all due respect, you could the issue of age. You could make the same argument 2 years after any government was elected. Oh, but the 16 and 17-year-olds didn't get a chance to vote, and they'll live with the consequences as well. But I'm sorry, the idea that 1 million students called on the government to do anything is a load of absolute nonsense. 1 million students weren't even up yesterday morning. The reality is a few hundred student union officers who were elected each by about a few hundred people decided to make a political statement. The idea that this represents more than 3,000 people is absurd.
Well, all the surveys just suggest that there is a big difference of view between generations. And it's a point I made. It hasn't made me popular with older people.
Because I'm 50, my view should count less than someone who's 20.
What it does mean is that the centre of gravity of public opinion is changing, and I think we need to be aware of that. We're not living where we were 2 years ago. The situation is moving on.
No. So Vince, there's no evidence for that.
The point that you made, which is perfectly valid, is that, of course, after a general election, people will then call and say, well, let's change it. Well, actually, in a democracy, that's what we do. We do have general elections every few years because public opinion moves. And I think what will happen on the Brexit issue is that there will be growing demands to have a vote on the final deal precisely for that reason.
Can I just say that you made that analogy with general elections? I hear this all the time. The difference whoever wins a general election, I can agree or disagree, but I wouldn't try and stop that government from taking power by trying to say that decision was null and void, or it was a bit too close, or it wasn't valid in some other way, or that the people who were voting were too stupid to know what they were voting for. You have to allow Brexit to happen, and then maybe in years to come that British people may want to have a say and want something different. But you still have to enact what the British people they were asked to have their say. They had their say. They spoke loudly and clearly. And yet there are still people like you, like Nick Clegg, like David Miliband, like Nicky Morgan, who are still trying to stop it happening.
Well, the problem is not with us. I mean, we are making the argument, and you may dislike it, but the problem is that those people who are trying to make Brexit happen, the Cabinet, the Prime Minister, cannot agree with their colleagues on what Brexit actually means. And this is the problem. We made a simple choice in the referendum, yes, no, and the vote was to Brexit. And now we're beginning to realise, through negotiation, that Brexit is very complicated. There are lots of different versions of it, and they all have costs and benefits, and they're all very divisive. And this is the struggle we're in at the moment. Of course, people like me have a clearly defined view, and will continue to express it. That is not the problem. The problem is that the government cannot agree within itself on what Brexit actually means, and therefore are struggling to deliver it.
Yeah, they are struggling to deliver it, and they can't agree. But I have a funny feeling, even if they knew exactly what they wanted and totally in agreement, that there'd be people like you, David Miliband, and others who would still be trying to stop it happening.
Well, we're doing it in a perfectly democratic spirit, and we're trying to improve the legislation as it goes through Parliament, and we're saying that at the end of the day, The public voted in the referendum to start this process. The people should have the final say, and I don't quite see why the Brexiteers find that so uncomfortable.
It's just amazing how many people fought for so long not to have a referendum, and now they want them every week. So Vince Cable, leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ramona in Chief, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate you talking to us.